be me, 30 years old, marketing lead at a mid-sized firm in Austin. Good salary, my own apartment, weekend yoga, the occasional hiking trip, and a small circle of friends I grab dinner with after work. Life's supposed to be good, and mostly, it is. I never wanted kids. I was vocal about that. Like, part of my brand vocal. Since college, I've been the one saying, not every woman needs a family to be complete. While everyone else was daydreaming about weddings and nurseries, I was focused on career milestones, side hustles, and keeping my independence intact. It wasn't just a phase, I meant it, because I grew up watching my mom stretch every dollar my dad brought home, cook, clean, and quietly carry the weight of everyone else. He wasn't abusive, just traditional. He worked, she served, every Sunday, same picture. Dad on the couch watching football, Mom folding laundry next to him, pretending to care who scored. I used to watch that and swear, that will never be me. By college, I'd already drawn the line. No husband, no kids, no apron. Freedom was the goal. My sister thought I was just going through a phase. She had her first kid at 26, the same year I got promoted. One day, we were at brunch, and she said, "You'll change your mind once the right guy comes along." I laughed. "I've met plenty of right guys, thanks. I just don't need a baby to prove I have worth." She went quiet, like I'd insulted her personally. Maybe I did. I just hated that assumption. That motherhood is the real finish line, and everything else is a warm-up act. Even at work, I didn't filter myself. Once, during lunch, a co-worker announced she was pregnant. Everyone congratulated her. I smiled and said, "So you're giving up your sleep, your paycheck, and your sanity, all for someone who won't even remember you doing it." They laughed, but not warmly. Still, I shrugged it off. I wasn't trying to be cruel, I just genuinely didn't get it. Another time, one of the younger girls, Emily, mentioned she wanted kids before 30. I told her, just make sure you get what you want out of life before you become someone's full-time snack provider. Same reaction, half laughs, half discomfort. Back then, I didn't care. I thought I was just saying what everyone else was too polite to admit. Dating was casual. Work events, mutual friends, the occasional app. If a guy hinted at marriage or kids, I was gone. One guy, Ryan, joked about how cute our kids would be one day. I smiled, but inside, I felt this weird pressure crawl up my spine, like he was already picturing me barefoot in a kitchen. I ghosted him 2 days later. Another guy, Matt, once said he wanted to build something real. I told him, "I'm not an architect, Matt." He didn't laugh. I didn't care. My mum used to drop hints at family gatherings. "You'll want a family someday, Rach." It's different when it's yours. I'd roll my eyes and say, "That's your generation talking, Mom." I'm not built for that. Dad would just shake his head, mumbling something about modern girls. I took it as a compliment. Honestly, I thought I was winning at life. While my friends were juggling daycare costs and husbands who barely tried, I was booking flights and sleeping in on Sundays. Freedom was the reward. No crying babies, no split bank accounts, no asking permission to exist. At brunches, I'd watch them show up exhausted, talking about fevers and soccer practice, while I showed off the new designer bag I'd just bought. In my mind, they'd chosen their cages. I'd chosen wings. I'd tell anyone who'd listen. Motherhood is beautiful if it's your calling. It's just not mine, but if I'm being honest, I didn't just think it wasn't for me. I thought I was better for not wanting it. Smarter, stronger, like I'd seen through the trap everyone else had fallen for. That confidence, it felt like armor. To all the men who talked about wanting something real, building a family, or settling down someday, I had the same response. a half smile, and a raised brow. I'd tell them, "You might want someone a little more barefoot and bakes pies." If they laughed, maybe there'd be a second date. If not, whatever. I told myself that meant I was untouchable, and I believed it. The next few years blurred together. Work, short flings, promotions that felt important for about a week. I kept telling myself I was too busy to think about anything else. By 34, the pace hadn't slowed, but the feeling had. The wins felt smaller. The quiet after work felt heavier. I was still at the same marketing firm, now a team lead. It sounds impressive, but mostly it means taking the blame when clients change their minds. The paycheck's decent. My car starts every morning and I still live alone, which I tell myself I like. Mostly. Sometimes on Sunday nights, I scroll through old travel photos. Paris, Seattle, Costa Rica, and instead of pride, I just feel still. Like I've done everything I was supposed to do, but somehow nothing's really changed. Same routines, same faces, just quieter now. That realization hit me hard the day I went to Tanya's baby shower. We'd been college roommates, total opposites even back then. She was the one baking cupcakes for her boyfriend's birthday while I was breaking up with mine over text. When I got the invitation, I almost didn't go. The idea of sitting around a living room covered in pastel balloons sounded like a nightmare, but I went. Mostly out of guilt. The second I walked in, it was chaos. Baby clothes everywhere, the smell of vanilla candles, women squealing over tiny socks. I remember standing there, holding a glass of cheap Prosecco, trying not to roll my eyes. At one point, someone handed Tanya a diaper cake. Literally a stack of diapers wrapped with ribbons, and everyone clapped like she'd just won an award. I muttered, "I hope she gets store credit for that." The woman next to me didn't laugh. Tanya looked tired but happy, the kind of happy that made me uncomfortable. I joked, "You're basically an unpaid nanny with stretch marks now." She laughed politely, but there was this look, soft, almost pitying, when she said, "It's different when it's yours, Rach." That was the exact thing I remember my mum said years ago. I wanted to argue, to roll my eyes, to say something sharp. But then she held up one of those tiny onesies with little stars on it, and for some reason, my throat tightened. I left early, told her I had errands. But when I got home, I just sat there in silence. A few weeks later, I went for my annual medical checkup. The doctor, mid-40s, practical, zero small talk, was running through the usual questions. "Any plans for kids?" she asked, just like that. I laughed out loud. Hell no. I like my sleep too much. She didn't even look up from the chart. Okay, just asking, because if you ever change your mind, now's the time to start checking hormone levels. I blinked. Wait, what do you mean, now's the time? She smiled faintly. Not trying to pressure you. It's just biology, Rachel. Things change after 35. That shut me up. She moved on to the next question, like nothing happened, but that one line hit harder than I wanted to admit. Not because I suddenly wanted kids, I didn't, but because of the way she said it, like gravity. Just a fact. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch. Lights off, laptop glowing in front of me. I looked up, fertility after 35, out of curiosity. I don't know why I did that. Curiosity? Panic? Ego? The results weren't exactly comforting. Percentages, risks, diminished ovarian reserve. The phrasing alone sounded like a judgment. I closed the laptop, stared at the ceiling, and told myself I wasn't scared. I just didn't like the idea that biology got the final say. I thought, okay, maybe not never. Maybe, if it happened, I'd do it differently. That idea spiraled faster than I expected. If I had kids, They wouldn't grow up with all that outdated gender crap. No boys don't cry, no princess nonsense. I'd raise them with awareness, the kind the world still fights against. My house would be a safe space for expression and equality. If I had a son, he'd learn consent before he learned multiplication. He'd play with dolls if he wanted to. I'd make sure he unlearned toxic masculinity before it even found him. If I had a daughter, she'd never be told to smile for anyone. She'd know her worth wasn't in her looks or who she dated. She'd be strong, outspoken, unshakable, and definitely know how to use a man in all the ways that she should, since they love bragging about being the providers. I'd be the mom who showed them both what real empowerment looked like. Not apron strings and PTA meetings. Actual growth. Actual independence. In my head, I started seeing it clearly. The modern, redefined version of family. No, father knows best. No, wait until your dad gets home. No subtle hierarchies. No compromises for comfort. Just partnership and principles. It started to make a strange kind of sense. Maybe having kids wasn't giving in. Maybe it was strategy. If the next generation was where change happened, then why not raise the change myself? I could raise kids who challenged everything I hated growing up. Boys who refused to dominate, girls who refused to obey. Kids who'd question every power structure before it could shape them. The more I thought about it, the more it felt less like motherhood and more like a mission. Not diapers and lullabies. Legacy. If I ever had kids, they wouldn't just exist in the world. They'd rewrite it. A few days later at work, I was chatting with Lily, one of the senior managers. Late 40s, 2 teenagers, steady as a metronome, even when everyone else is losing it. The type of woman who makes balance look effortless, which, for some reason, always irritated me. I told her about Tanya's shower, half laughing. I could never be one of those mums who disappears into diapers and playdates. If I ever had kids, I'd do it right. Make sure they grow up actually aware of how the world works. She glanced up from her screen. Aware how? You know, not brainwashed by all that outdated gender stuff. My kids would understand equality, consent, privilege, all of it. If I had a son, he'd know the world doesn't revolve around him. If I had a daughter, she'd know she never owes anyone softness just to be liked. Lily didn't flinch, just listened quietly. When I paused, she said, "Sounds like you'd raise good people, but maybe ease up on the syllabus a little." I frowned. Syllabus? She smiled gently. You sound like you want to teach a course instead of raise a kid. Kids don't come out with politics. They come out with curiosity. If you start loading them with ideology too early, any ideology, you just replace one kind of bias with another. I crossed my arms. So what? You think teaching them about equality is wrong? No, she said, calm as ever. Teaching them through rules about equality is different from showing them what it looks like. You can tell a kid 100 times that boys and girls are equal, but if you treat people with respect and empathy, they'll learn that faster than any lecture, I scoffed. You make it sound like being intentional is bad. Not bad, she said, just heavy. Kids aren't tools for fixing the world, they're people. If you raise them to carry your causes before they even know who they are, you're not freeing them. You're just choosing the cage for them instead of letting them build it themselves. Her tone wasn't condescending, if anything, it was annoyingly reasonable. But it hit a nerve. Grow with them, not through them. That was what she was saying, even if she didn't spell it out. The thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. In my head, parenting had always been about control, about directing the outcome, shaping it, making sure the next generation didn't make the same mistakes. But Lily's words poked at something I hadn't considered. What if I wasn't supposed to control it? What if I was supposed to trust it. That idea felt messy, vulnerable. And humility? Yeah, that's never really been my thing. Lily's words stayed with me longer than I wanted. Grow with them, not through them. I'd replay it while driving to work or brushing my teeth, telling myself it was just another boomer perspective. Still, part of me hated how reasonable it sounded. Maybe that's why I started thinking more seriously about finding someone. If I was going to raise this revolutionary family, I'd need a partner, someone who believed in progress as much as I did. So, I re-downloaded the dating apps. Filters: feminist, progressive, socially aware, pro-choice. My profile line read, looking for someone who believes raising the next generation right matters. Empathy over ego. A few matches popped up. Most fizzled after one coffee. They smiled politely when I talked about redefining masculinity or teaching boys empathy, but their eyes glazed over. I told myself that was good. I was weeding out the fragile ones. Then there was Daniel, early 30s, consultant, calm, deliberate voice. He didn't brag. He didn't flinch when I said I was career-focused, so when he asked me to dinner, I said yes without hesitation. We met at a place on South Lamar that looked like it belonged in a travel magazine. Exposed brick, wine glasses that cost more than the wine. He was easy to talk to. We joked about bad clients, traded travel stories. He had this dry sense of humor that didn't compete with mine, which was rare. He actually listened, not waiting to talk, but really listening. For once I thought, this might actually go somewhere. Then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, he asked about the future, not in a pushy way, just curious. So where do you see yourself in a few years? I smiled. Honestly? Maybe raising kids, if it's on my terms. I want to do it differently. He tilted his head, intrigued. Differently how? No gender nonsense, I said immediately. No power imbalance. I want a family that runs on principles, not old habits. If I had a son, he'd learn consent before long division. If I had a daughter, she'd never think she owes anyone softness to be liked. Daniel nodded slowly. That's structured. Structured's good, I said. We need structure if we want to fix what's broken. He smiled faintly. Fix? You make it sound like kids are a social project. It's not a project, I said, shaking my head. It's responsibility. Every generation either repeats the last one's mistakes or corrects them. I'd rather correct. He took a sip of wine, thoughtful. Okay, but what if that correction becomes its own kind of overreach? I frowned. Meaning? I mean, he said carefully, you talk about raising them to be free, but it sounds like you'd be programming them, telling them what to think instead of how to think. I leaned in a little. No, I'd be teaching them how to think, to challenge everything. Especially old masculine conditioning. We've let boys grow up believing empathy makes them weak. And girls? They're raised to be polite little doormats. I'd tear that cycle apart. Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying me. So, what happens if your son wants to play football, and your daughter wants to wear pink dresses and be a stay-at-home mom? I laughed. Then I'd ask where they learned that. He smiled politely. Maybe from just being themselves. They'd unlearn it, I said quickly, because they'd understand how those choices were built. People think they choose freely, but they're molded by patriarchy from birth. My job would be to break that mold. He blinked, slow and deliberate. Sounds exhausting. For everyone. Not exhausting, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Necessary. If I don't raise them aware, who will? The world isn't neutral, Daniel. If you're not teaching awareness, you're teaching ignorance. He leaned back, quiet for a few seconds before replying. You know, I don't think most men would be okay with that. I felt my chest tighten. Why? Because they're scared of raising kids who actually see through the bullshit? He chuckled softly, not mocking, just disbelieving. No. Because they'd feel like passengers in their own family. You've already decided what's acceptable before there's even a kid, or a partner. There's no space left for anyone else. That's such a typical male thing to say, I shot back, crossing my arms. You hear a woman with standards and call it control. He smiled again. That calm, patient kind of smile that feels worse than an argument. I think there's a difference between standards and blueprints. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. He took another sip of wine. Look, I get it. You want something better. That's good, but the way you describe it, it's like you're trying to build a lab experiment. People aren't variables you can perfect. It's not about perfection, I said. It's about progress. He tilted his head, that same quiet amusement in his eyes. Progress for who? Them or you? That question landed harder than I wanted. The waiter appeared, clearing plates, breaking the tension. Daniel glanced at his watch, polite smile locked in place. He changed the subject. Hiking, weather, travel. I answered, but the warmth was gone. When the bill came, he insisted on paying. I didn't argue. Outside, he walked me to my car, hands in his pockets, posture easy. You're really passionate, he said finally. I respect that. The words were kind, but they felt like an ending. I forced a smile. Guess that's rare these days. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it's just a lot. He smiled once more, then turned and walked away. The next week, I was in the break room with Lily, trying to sound casual while clearly venting. Every time I think I meet someone decent, it's the same thing, I said, ripping the lid off my coffee. They love the idea of a confident woman until she actually talks about what she believes. Lily stirred her tea. Maybe it's not what you're saying, Rach. Maybe it's how I scoffed. Oh, please. Daniel just couldn't handle hearing that I don't want to raise another generation of spoiled little men who think the world owes them something. Or, she said gently, maybe he didn't want to feel like one of them. Before I could respond, David walked in, shirt sleeves rolled up. He must have caught the last part because he smiled faintly. Sounds like Daniel had a long night, I laughed dryly. He couldn't keep up. Said I sounded like I wanted to run a social experiment instead of a family. David leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Did you tell him he was wrong? Of course, I said, because he was wrong. He tilted his head slightly. Maybe. But from what I just heard, I don't think any men would be okay with that. I blinked. With what? The way you talk about family like it's a reform program, he said evenly. Men don't want to feel like they're signing up for correction. They want to build something with someone, not be told what parts of themselves need fixing first. I felt heat rise in my face. So I should shrink myself to make them comfortable. David shook his head. No. But if your version of partnership leaves no space for someone else's voice, don't call it equality. Call it command. The silence after that felt thick. Lily didn't say anything, just watched me, her eyes soft but steady. David straightened, gave a small nod. You want a partner, not a pupil. Most men can tell the difference. Then he left, as calm as he'd arrived. I stared at the coffee machine, pulse in my ears, the words looping in my head like a dare. If no man could handle it, fine. Who said I even needed one? I could do it myself. Adopt. Raise a kid the right way. No compromises. No ego in the way. Maybe that's what progress really looked like. Doing it alone because no one else could keep up.